We're going to take a look at equations now that have variables on both sides of the equal sign. So find this page in your notes packet that we've given to you. It says guided video notes, variables on both sides with the distributive property. So find this page. There are 6 problems on it. And we're going to work through them and see how it goes. Okay, I'm zooming in on number 1, and what I'd like to do first is kind of just remind myself there's the equal sign. And for this problem, I can see there's 4 x's on one side of the problem and 6 x's on the other side of the problem. So our first step would be to get these variables together. When we move across the equal sign, we use inverse operation. So here's how this looks. Since this is a positive 4x, I'm going to use a minus 4x to get this to become 0 or to cancel out. Whatever I do on one side of the equal sign, I have to do on the other side to keep a balance. So then we solve 6x minus 4x, that equals 2x. Then bring all the remaining pieces down. So we have minus 25 and we have a positive 19. Now this should look familiar to you. This is now a 2-step equation. We continue to solve a 2-step equation using inverse operations. So our next step would be add 25 to both sides of the equal sign. Minus 25 and plus 25, that creates a neutral pair or cancels out. And then bring down our 2x and equals. And this is 2x equals 44. And then we continue the use of inverse operations. Remember, a coefficient next to a variable that indicates multiplication. And the inverse of multiplication is division. So we would divide both sides by 2 to isolate the variable or to get the x by itself. And 44 divided by 2 equals 22. Okay, so we use inverse operations, but our first step when we have variables on both sides, our first step would be to get our variables together. Okay, let's continue on to our second example. So here again, I remind myself of that equal sign there. And I've got a variable here and a variable here. Let's get those together first. And we use, again, reminder, we keep using the inverse operation. Okay. So since this is a minus 10x, to get a minus 10x to cancel out, I use the inverse, or I add 10x. And I add 10x to both sides. Now, careful here with your integers. Negative 7 plus 10. Negative 7 plus 10. That equals a positive 3x. Feel free to use your calculator too if you're still having trouble with problems like this. Okay, now we are in our 2-step equation spot. So now we continue using inverse operations. Our next step would be to get rid of subtraction by doing addition on both sides of the equal sign. Okay, that's canceling out that 45. And then we would bring down 3x equals 75. And then the final step, remember 3 times x, we're going to use inverse operations. The inverse of multiplication is division. And please start, if you haven't already, you should be using that fraction bar to show division. And 75 divided by 3 is 25. Okay, so we go step by step, but when you have variables on both sides, you want to get your variables together first. Moving on to number 3. I have an x here and 7x here. Using inverse operations to get the 7x to move to the other side, I have to use inverse operations. So for plus 7, to cancel it out, I do minus 7 on both sides. Recall that if we have this x by itself, we're allowed to put a 1 in front of it. So this is 1 minus 7. 1 minus 7. 1 minus 7 equals negative 3 or negative 6x. Then bring everything down. And now we have a two-step equation. Our next step would be to get rid of this minus 9. The inverse of subtraction is addition. That cancels out. Okay, be careful here. Negative 15 plus 9. Punch that in a calculator if you need to do that. Negative 15 plus 9 is negative 6. And our final step is to get that x by itself to isolate the variable, doing the inverse of multiplication using division. Negative 6 divided by negative 6 is a positive 1. Let's keep going. Again, pause the video if I'm going too fast. You can go back and watch. All right, here we go. There's our equal sign. Here's the variables. Our first step is to get the variables together on the same side. Use inverse operations. Since it's minus 4x, we're going to add 4x to both sides. Okay, that cancels that out and leaves us with 11x. And then bring everything down. So we have a minus 5. Okay, right here, this is 11x, so it's a positive, or I can bring the plus sign down. Okay. Our next step, we're isolating the variable. So first we want to get rid of this minus 5, so we add 5 to both sides. That brings us with 11x and 44. And then use inverse operations on your last step. And x equals 4. Step by step, notice I show all of my steps. I don't try to skip anything. I go step by step. Okay, the next two examples use the distributive property. So we're going to have to handle that first. Remember when we did the distributive property, it's multiplying the outside number by both items inside the parentheses. So our first step here is negative 8 times negative 8. A negative times a negative is a positive. So that's 64x. And then negative 8 times negative 6 is positive 48. And then I'm going to bring everything else down. Okay, so that's step 1. Clear the parentheses, use your distributive property. All right, now we have an x over here and an x over here. We have to get those together using inverse operations. So since it's minus 6x, I'm going to add 6x together so I can get all the x's on one side. And now let's add 64 plus 6. That's 70x, and bring everything else down. And now we have a two-step equation. Now we're going to solve the two-step equation using inverse operations. So we're going to go right here next. Since it's plus 48, we're going to subtract 48 on both sides. And that cancels out. I'm left with 70x equals, all right, caution right here, negative 22 minus 48. Calculator in hand if you need it. Negative 22 minus 48. That's going to be negative 70. In the final step, remember when a coefficient is next to a variable, that means multiplication. Our final step is to divide. A negative 70 divided by a positive 70, a negative divided by a positive is a negative. So all those integer rules are kind of coming back at us. We have to keep them all straight. Okay, so if you have the distributive property, like we did here, you do that first and then get your variables all together and then solve step by step, showing each and every step. Oh boy, okay. We have double distributive property on this one. So remember, I love drawing these arrows. It reminds me that I have to multiply both items by -5. Parentheses indicate multiplication. And we got to do it over here. We have to multiply both things by -2. Okay, so let's do the first step first. -5 times 4, that's -20x. And -5 times a -2, negative times a negative is a positive. Okay, now let's get rid of the parentheses on the other side. -2 times 3 is -6. -2 times 6 is -12x. Okay, so step 1, use the distributive property. Step 2, let's get our variables together. Let's get our letters to the left. So I'm going to get rid of 12x by using inverse operations and adding 12x to both sides. That cancels out. Careful with your integers. -20 plus 12. That's going to be a -8x. Bring everything else down, work neatly, go step by step. All right, now we're going to use, now we have a two-step equation. So this right here should be really familiar to you. We're going to subtract 10 on both sides. That leaves us with -8x. And again, those negatives, -6 minus 10 is -16. Final step, divide. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. So we get 2 for that. Whew. Okay, lots of work, lots of steps. Rewatch if you need help. Ask us as well. Now we did leave you a challenge problem at the end. If you think you're ready to take the challenge, you can work that and we can check that for you. You can show it to us. Okay.